Thank you for joining me today at A Touch of Blue Studio with Drawing with Grandma. Today we are going to do something very fun and unique that I love to do with my students. We're going to do a monoprint. We want to sketch this simple leaf, and sometimes it's just really fun to pick something up from outside and practice drawing it. But we're going to sketch it this way, which is to lay it flat on a piece of paper in your sketchbook, and then use your rubbing tool, or you could use your pencil on its side, and just skim off the edges as you hold it still to create the shape. This is a simple way to do some flat objects, just to quickly get the outline correct. You can draw it too. Do it either way you want. Then I'm going to kind of shape the outer edge, and that's going to become part of the cast shadow. So now I can go in, and as I study the leaf, I can begin to look at the specifics of its details and the characteristics of it. And of course, starting with that center line is really helpful. And then to sketch out the stem. As I'm sketching lightly, I will begin creating the corrected form and just double checking my edges. I'm going to sketch in the cast shadow. The light is coming from the upper left, and it's creating a really nice cast shadow there. So you'll see that come to life with some color as we develop it. And I want to erase out some of those smudge marks and shape the cast shadow so that it just looks more three-dimensional. It looks more realistic. So I'm going to do that, and then I want you to watch me develop some of the details before we move on to a wash of watercolor. So I think I'm going to start by developing the edges and making sure the stem and the opposite point of the leaf is correct, and then to work in with some of those distinctive veins in a leaf. So as you're drawing nature, it's just amazing to look at the details that we sometimes don't even think about. But when you look closely at an acorn or a shell or a leaf, there's just so much fine detail to all of these objects that they make great sketchbook studies and practice work. So if I were you, I would go to your yard, or when you are traveling to a beach or to the woods, that you pick up small little objects and develop them into your sketchbook as you study them. I'm starting with the watercolor now. I am going to have the leaf right there in front of me, and you usually want to start with a wash over your object with the lightest color. And I don't want to make mine as brown because I let this leaf sit a little long, and it kind of got a little browner, but I'm underlaying it with some yellow, and then there is some green in the upper left areas, but I do want to lay in this golden brown and have it bleed right into the yellow stain, so we have a really beautiful range of yellow oranges and yellowish browns. But I am careful with watercolor to not cover everything. You want some of the little glimmers of white paper to show through. That's one thing that really is unique about watercolor artists. They use the paper as their lightest highlights. Sometimes painters will use white to detail and to create the lightest lights, but watercolor artists use the paper that's left white. So I am going to now move on to some detail and get the stem laid in with a beautiful reddish brown, and then let some of that wash of brown just soak right in while the other colors are wet. The cast shadow, I'm putting some darker tones of bluish gray, so it's not quite black, it's more of a deep blue gray. And what that does is it defines the shadow, but it also defines the leaf and makes it look like it's lifting up a little bit off the ground. And then as I'm doing that, I want to be careful of my leaf edge and make sure that it shows some of those little unique points that are on the very tips of the leaf. So some of that is left. Okay, I'm going to do a wash of color around it, and that will help just to kind of give it an atmosphere, context, or what you want to say is a ground plane. And it just adds a little bit more interest to the whole study. So let's see, we could add a lot more detail, a lot more brown. I'm going to look at what is needed in order to complete this. I think a little bit more on the stem and some emphasis on those lines and veins. There are some spots too, and so I want to look and study the texture of that leaf. And of course I'm not going to get every detail. It's not important to get every detail necessarily. I mean, it's good practice, but you really want to create the nature of the leaf itself and to just study those details and look at them and observe them and try to replicate them in your pencil and paints. But every detail is not as important. Sometimes you're just creating the symbolism of it and the practice of it. So just some final touches on this shadow. And you could go in with some colored pencils and do more detail. You could do some ink line, but I'm just going to leave it this way. So here is the study. And here is the finished sketch. Thank you for watching and for joining me here with Drawing with Grandma at A Touch of Blue Studio.